The Great Hall of Nexus Prime stretched for miles in every direction. Its walls were made of living crystal that sang softly when the light touched them. Floating platforms carried delegates from hundreds of worlds, each one different from the last. Some had wings, some had scales. Some were made of pure energy that shifted and glowed. This was the Galactic Assembly, the greatest gathering of intelligent life in the known universe. Ambassador Vornak walked through the central chamber with slow, careful steps. He was a Thessian, a tall creature with pale blue skin and 4 arms that he kept folded politely behind his back. His large black eyes took in everything around him. He had served the assembly for nearly 200 years, but the sight of so many species working together still filled him with pride. 412 worlds had representatives here. 412 seats arranged in perfect circles around the central speaking platform. Each seat was designed for the species that would use it. Some were pools of water, some were nests of soft material, some were simply empty spaces where beings of light could hover. But one seat was different from all the others. It sat in the third ring, between the delegation from the Mineral Collective and the floating sphere that held the gas beings of Pentara. It was a simple chair, made of a dark material that Vornak did not recognize. It was sized for a medium bipedal species, nothing special about its design, and it had been empty for 3,000 years. Vornak stopped in front of it, as he often did during his walks through the chamber. A small plaque at the base read, Sol 3, Local Designation, Earth, Species, Human. That was all. No other information, no diplomatic notes, no trade agreements, nothing. You stare at that chair too often, old friend. Vornak turned to see High Chancellor Mirateth approaching. She was beautiful in the way all Luminari were beautiful. Her body was humanoid but made of soft light, and great wings of golden energy spread from her back. She had led the assembly for 500 years, and her wisdom was respected by all. I cannot help it, Vornak admitted. It troubles me. 3,000 years, and they have never sent anyone. We know they exist. Our earliest records confirm they received our invitation. They even accepted it. But no human has ever walked these halls. Mirateth's expression grew uncomfortable. Her wings folded close to her body, a sign of distress among her people. Some mysteries are best left alone. You know something, Vornak said. It was not a question. The High Chancellor was silent for a long moment. Then she sighed, a sound like wind through crystal chimes. Walk with me. They moved through the empty chamber together, their footsteps echoing in the vast space. Most delegates were in their quarters at this hour, resting before the next day's sessions. When I was young, Mirateth began, I asked the same questions you ask now. I sent messages to Earth. Standard diplomatic channels. I received no reply. So I sent ships, 3 of them, over the course of a century. The finest diplomatic vessels in our fleet. What happened? Nothing. Her voice was flat. They entered the Sol system. They sent back initial reports. Everything seemed normal. A yellow star, 8 planets, the third one covered in water and green land. Signs of advanced civilization. And then, silence. Not destruction. Our sensors would have detected that. Just silence. As if they had simply stopped existing. Vornak felt cold despite the warm air. You never told the assembly. What would I tell them? That ships vanish near Earth? That the humans accept our invitations but never come? It would cause panic. It would cause fear. And we have enough problems without adding a mystery that has no answer. They stopped at a great window that looked out into space. 1,000 ships moved around Nexus Prime, trading goods and carrying delegates. The galaxy was at peace. It had been at peace for longer than most species could remember. So we just ignore them, Vornak said bitterly. We pretend that chair is not empty. Yes, Mirateth said. But Vornak could not let it go. In the days that followed, he began to dig through the assembly's oldest records. files that had not been opened in millennia, archives that most people had forgotten existed. He spent weeks in the deep vaults beneath Nexus Prime, reading documents written in languages that had been dead for thousands of years. And then he found it. It was a transmission. Very old. So old that it predated the assembly itself. It had been sent from Earth to the coordinates that would one day become Nexus Prime, at a time when the Thessians were still building their first cities, and the Luminari had not yet learned to fly between stars. The message was corrupted. Time had eaten away at the data, like rust eating metal. But Vornak was patient. He worked on it for months, reconstructing it piece by piece, and when he finally read the complete text, his blood turned to ice. It was not a response to the Assembly's invitation. It could not be, because it had been sent 4,000 years before humans supposedly achieved spaceflight, 4,000 years before anyone in the galaxy knew Earth existed. And it was not an acceptance. It was a warning. The words were simple, but they burned themselves into Vornak's mind. Do not look into the dark. Do not call into the void. Something watches from the space between galaxies. We have seen it. We will hold the line. For your sake and ours. Forget that we exist. Vornak sat in the cold vault for a long time, staring at those words. Outside, the assembly continued its peaceful work. Species traded and debated and celebrated their unity. They had no idea what lay beyond the edges of their maps. They had no idea what had been watching them since before their civilizations were born. And they had no idea that someone had been protecting them all along. He had to tell Mirateth. He had to tell everyone. But even as he rose to leave the vault, a terrible thought stopped him. If the humans had been fighting something in the dark for 4,000 years, and if they had told the galaxy to forget them, then there must be a reason. Perhaps the assembly was not ready to know. Perhaps they would never be ready. Or perhaps, after 4,000 years, humanity was finally losing. The vigilant dawn drifted through empty space, far beyond the edge of the galaxy. No stars burned here. No planets spun in their orbits. There was only darkness, cold and complete, stretching forever in all directions. Commander Laura Mitchell stood at the center of the bridge, her hands clasped behind her back. She was 43 years old, but she looked older. Her brown hair was cut short for practicality, and deep lines marked her face. She had been fighting since she was 16. Her mother had fought before her. Her grandmother before that. The Mitchell family had served on the front lines for 9 generations. Around her, the bridge crew worked in perfect silence. No one spoke unless they had to. No one made unnecessary movements. They had been trained since childhood for this duty. Every human had been. Contact in Sector 7, said Lieutenant Kyle Dawson. He was young, only 22. But his eyes held the same tired look as everyone else on the ship. Same signature as the last 12. Laura nodded slowly. 12 incursions in this cycle. That was actually a quiet period. During her grandmother's time, the Hollow had attacked in waves of hundreds. Thousands of ships had been lost in a single battle. Entire generations had been wiped out in days. Show me, she said. The main display flickered to life. It showed the boundary line that humanity had held for 4,000 years. On one side was the galaxy, warm and full of light. On the other side was the void between galaxies, where nothing should exist. But something did exist there. Something old. Something hungry. The contact appeared as a dark stain on the display. It did not have a proper shape. It shifted and changed, sometimes looking like a cloud of ink, sometimes like a tear in reality itself. Sensors could not properly read it. Computers could not classify it. The only thing anyone knew for certain was that it wanted to reach the light, and it would consume everything in its path to get there. Deploy the resonance array, Laura commanded. Standard pattern. The crew moved without hesitation. Weapons, systems, hummed to life. The ship turned to face the approaching darkness. Laura had seen recordings of what the Hollow did to their victims. It did not kill in any normal sense. It fed on consciousness, on thought, on the very essence of being alive. Those touched by it did not die. They simply stopped being. Their bodies remained, empty shells that stared with dead eyes. Their minds were gone, pulled into a darkness from which nothing returned. 4,000 years ago, humanity had been young and curious. They had sent a probe into the void, eager to explore the unknown. What came back had nearly ended their species in a single night. 2 billion people had been lost before humanity understood how to fight. 2 billion minds consumed by something that should not exist. The survivors had done the only thing they could. They built ships. They built weapons. They created a wall of steel and fire at the edge of the galaxy. And they sent a warning to the other species, the ones who lived in peace at the galaxy's heart. Do not look into the dark. Do not call into the void. Forget us. Because humanity knew what the Hollow would do to species that had never known war. The assembly worlds had no weapons, no armies, no understanding of true conflict. They would be helpless. They would be devoured in days. So humanity stood alone. They bore the cost. They died in the dark, so that others could live in the light. Resonance array is charged, Kyle reported. Ready to fire on your command. Laura watched the darkness grow closer on the display. She had killed hundreds of these things. Maybe thousands. She had lost count long ago. Her ship was covered in scars from battles that should have destroyed it. Half of her original crew was dead, replaced by fresh soldiers from Earth who would probably die too. Fire, she said. The vigilant dawn unleashed a beam of focused energy that screamed through the void. It struck the hollow entity dead center. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the darkness began to twist and writhe. A sound came through the sensors. A sound that was not really a sound at all. It was the feeling of something in agony. Something that had never known pain before. The entity collapsed in on itself and vanished. Contact destroyed, Kyle said. There was no celebration in his voice. No relief. They had won this battle, but there would be another tomorrow. And another, the day after. There would always be another. Laura turned to look at her crew. They were good people, brave people. They had given up any chance at a normal life to stand on this line. Some of them had families back on Earth that they would never see again. Some of them had children who were already training to take their place. Good work, she said. Rest while you can. She walked to her private quarters and sat down heavily in her chair. A photograph sat on her desk. It showed a young woman with bright eyes and a wide smile. Laura's daughter. Only 10 years old. She was already in the academy, learning to fight, learning to die. Sometimes Laura wondered what it would be like to live in the assembly, to exist in a universe where war was just a word in old books, to raise children who would never have to hold a weapon, to grow old without scars. But those thoughts never lasted long. Because Laura knew the truth. The assembly existed only because humanity had chosen to sacrifice itself. Every day of peace they enjoyed had been bought with human blood. A message appeared on her screen. It was from Command, back on Earth. New intelligence suggested that the Hollow were massing for a larger attack, the biggest in 300 years. All ships were being recalled to the front. Laura read the message twice, then deleted it. She would tell her crew in the morning. They deserved one more night of rest. She looked at the photograph of her daughter one more time. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm sorry. This is the world we gave you." Then she closed her eyes and tried to sleep, knowing that tomorrow she would fight again, and the day after, and every day, until she died, because that was what it meant to be human. That was the burden her species had carried for 4,000 years, and she would not let them down. Outside the ship, the darkness waited. It was patient. It had all the time in the universe, but so did humanity, and they would never stop fighting. Vornok's discovery spread through the assembly like fire through dry grass. Within days, Every species had heard about the ancient warning from Earth. Within weeks, the Great Hall of Nexus Prime was filled with voices demanding answers. High Chancellor Mirateth stood at the central platform, her wings spread wide as she tried to calm the crowd. But it was no use. 400 species were shouting at once, their translators creating a wall of noise that shook the crystal walls. "We must send a fleet!" cried the delegate from the warrior caste of Threx. "If something threatens the galaxy, we must destroy it. We should stay away," argued the representative of the collective mind. "The warning told us to forget them. We should obey. We should embrace. The warning is 4,000 years old," someone else shouted. "How do we know it is even real?" Mirateth raised her hands, and the chamber slowly fell quiet. Her light pulsed with authority as she spoke. "We will not send a fleet. We will send one ship, our finest vessel, the Luminance Eternal. Ambassador Vornok will lead the delegation. We will go to Earth, and we will learn the truth." Vornok felt his stomach drop. He had started this. Now, he would have to finish it. The journey to the Sol system took 3 months. The Luminance Eternal was the fastest ship in the assembly fleet. But Earth was far from Nexus Prime, in a quiet corner of the galaxy that most species had never visited. Vornak spent the journey studying everything the assembly knew about humans. It was not much. Old records described them as a young species, barely capable of spaceflight when the original invitation was sent. They were soft, weak, and short-lived compared to most assembly races. Their planet was small. Their technology was primitive. None of it made sense. How could such a species hold back a threat that endangered the entire galaxy? When the Luminance Eternal finally entered the Sol system, Vornak understood. The outer planets were surrounded by massive structures, unlike anything he had ever seen. They were not stations or habitats. They were walls, barriers of metal and energy that stretched for millions of miles. They formed a sphere around the entire system, blocking all entry and exit. And between those barriers, humanity's fleet waited. Vornak stared at the display in shock. There were thousands of ships, maybe tens of thousands. They were dark and angular, nothing like the elegant vessels of the assembly. They had no decoration, no beauty. They were weapons, pure and simple, built for one purpose only. "We are being hailed," the communications officer said. His voice was shaking. "Put it through," Vornak replied. A human face appeared on the screen. It was a woman with hard eyes and gray hair cut short. She wore a uniform covered in symbols that Vornak did not recognize. "Assembly vessel," she said. "You should not be here. Turn around and leave. This is your only warning." "We cannot do that," Vornak said. "We have come seeking answers. 4,000 years ago, your people sent a warning to the galaxy. We need to know what you were warning us about." The woman's expression did not change. "That information is classified. Leave now." Please," Vornak said. "Something is happening. We have felt disturbances at the edge of our territory. Strange readings. Ships disappearing. We believe it is connected to your warning. We believe you have been protecting us. We want to help." For a long moment, the woman was silent. Then she spoke to someone off-screen. When she turned back to the camera, something had changed in her eyes. Not kindness, exactly. More like resignation. "Hold your position. A representative will come to you." They waited for 6 hours. Then a single human ship approached, small and battered. It docked with the Luminance Eternal, and a man walked aboard. His name was Daniel Price. He was in his 50s, with weathered skin and tired eyes. 2 guards followed him, but they did not look like they expected trouble. They looked like they were barely staying awake. Daniel looked at Vornak and the other assembly delegates. He looked at the fine decorations of the Luminance Eternal, the comfortable furniture, the peaceful expressions of the crew, and his face showed something between pity and exhaustion. "You really do not know, do you?" he said. "You have no idea what is out there." "That is why we came," Vornak replied. "To learn." Daniel laughed, but there was no humor in it. "To learn. 4,000 years. We have bled and died to keep you safe. 4,000 years. And you want to learn." He walked to the great window that showed the Sol system beyond. The massive barriers, the fleet of warships, the planet Earth, small and blue in the distance. "Come with me," he said. "I will show you what we have been protecting you from. I will show you the war you never knew existed. But I warn you now, Ambassador, once you know the truth, you cannot unknow it. Your peace will be gone forever." Vornak looked at the other delegates. They were afraid. He could see it in their eyes. But they had come too far to turn back now. "Show us," he said. Daniel nodded slowly. "Then, welcome to humanity's burden. I hope you are ready." He was not ready. None of them were. But as the luminance eternal followed Daniel's ship toward Earth, Vornak understood that readiness did not matter. The truth was coming, whether they wanted it or not. And the truth, he suspected, would change everything. Earth was not what Vornak had expected. The old records described a world of blue oceans and green forests, filled with billions of people living in great cities. A young civilization, full of hope and curiosity. The planet below him was something else entirely. The oceans were still there, but the land had been transformed. Great factories covered entire continents, their smokestacks reaching toward the sky. Shipyards the size of small countries built warships day and night. Military bases spread across every surface, connected by roads that carried soldiers and supplies in an endless stream. There were no parks, no monuments to art or beauty, no signs of the peaceful life that the assembly species enjoyed. Every inch of Earth served one purpose: war. Daniel led the delegation to a transport ship that carried them down to the surface. They landed in a city that had no name, only a number. The buildings were gray and functional. The streets were clean, but empty. Everyone Vornak saw wore uniforms. "Where are the civilians?" asked one of the Thessian delegates. Daniel looked at her with something like confusion. "There are no civilians. Everyone serves. Everyone fights. That is how it has been since the beginning." He took them to a training facility first. Through windows, Vornak watched children as young as 6, learning to use weapons. Their faces were serious. Their movements were precise. They did not play or laugh like the children of assembly worlds. They trained. "Every human begins military education at age 5, Daniel explained. Basic combat, survival skills, ship operations. By age 16, they are ready for their first deployment. Most serve at the front for at least 10 years before returning to support roles." "But what about choice?" Vornak asked. "What if someone does not want to fight?" Daniel stopped walking. He turned to face the ambassador, and for the first time, there was anger in his eyes. "Choice? You ask about choice?" He gestured toward the window, toward the children training below. Those children did not choose to be born into a war. Their parents did not choose. Their grandparents did not choose. For 160 generations, we have had no choice. We fight, because if we do not, everything dies. He continued walking, and the delegates followed in silence. The next stop was the Hall of Remembrance. It was the largest building Vornak had ever entered, bigger than the assembly chamber on Nexus Prime. Its walls stretched upward until they disappeared into darkness, and every inch of those walls was covered in names. 87 billion, Daniel said quietly. That is how many humans have died fighting the Hollow. 87 billion lives, given freely so that you could live in peace. Vornak tried to understand that number, but he could not. His own species numbered only 12 billion in total. The Luminari were barely 3 billion. The idea that one species could lose so many and still continue fighting was beyond his comprehension. In the center of the hall stood a statue of a woman. She wore an old-fashioned uniform, and her face was carved in an expression of determination. A plaque at her feet read, "Captain Nicole Graves. First to see the enemy. First to fall. First to fight." 4,000 years ago, Daniel said, standing before the statue, humanity sent a probe into the space between galaxies. We were curious. We wanted to know what was out there. The probe found something. Something old. Something that had been waiting since before the first stars were born. He paused, gathering his thoughts. We call them the Hollow. We do not know what they really are. They are not alive in any way we understand. They do not have bodies or ships or technology. They are more like a hunger-given form. They feed on consciousness, on thought, on the very spark that makes a being alive. When they touch you, you do not die. You simply cease to exist. The delegates stood in horrified silence. The probe brought them to us. They came to Earth, like moths to a flame. In a single night, 2 billion people were consumed. Not killed, consumed. Their bodies walked around empty, their minds gone forever. It was like watching a plague spread across the world. Daniel's hands clenched into fists. We fought back. We learned that certain frequencies of energy could hurt them. We built weapons. We built ships. We pushed them back beyond our solar system, and then we realized something terrible. What? Vornak whispered. They were heading toward the galaxy's core, toward the assembly worlds, toward species that had never known war, that had no weapons, that would be helpless against them. So we made a choice. We would build a wall. We would stand between the darkness and the light. We would fight forever, if we had to. He turned to face the delegates, and his eyes were wet with tears he refused to shed. We sent you a warning. We told you to forget us, because we knew you were not ready. We knew you could not fight. And we decided that your innocence was worth protecting, even if it cost us everything. Vornak thought of his home world. The beautiful cities, the peaceful gardens, the children who played without fear. All of it existed because humans had chosen to suffer instead. We could have come to you, Daniel continued. We could have asked for help. But what help could you give? You have no weapons. You have no soldiers. Your ships are made for trade and exploration, not war. If we had told you the truth, you would have panicked. You would have fallen apart, and the Hollow would have consumed you while you argued about what to do. He walked toward the exit, and the delegates followed. So we stayed silent. We kept fighting. We died by the billions. And every year, we grew weaker. Our population shrinks. Our resources run low. The Hollow grows stronger. Outside the Hall of Remembrance, a group of soldiers marched past. They were young, barely adults. They did not look at the strange aliens walking beside them. They had more important things to worry about. How long can you hold? Vornak asked. Daniel was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. 200 years. Maybe less. And then the line will break. And everything we have sacrificed will mean nothing. Vornak felt something change inside him. The universe he knew, the peaceful galaxy where species cooperated and no one feared the darkness, was a lie. It had always been a lie, and now he had to decide what to do about it. The journey back to Nexus Prime felt longer than the journey out. Vornak spent most of it alone in his quarters, staring at the recordings he had made on Earth. The children training with weapons, the Hall of Remembrance with its 87 billion names, the soldiers marching to ships that would carry them to a war without end. He had not slept properly since leaving the Sol system. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Daniel's face. He heard his words. 200 years. Maybe less. The assembly was waiting when the Luminance Eternal returned. Representatives from every species filled the great hall, eager for news. High Chancellor Mirateth stood at the central platform, her wings spread wide with anticipation. Vornak walked to the speaking position. His legs felt weak, his voice felt trapped in his throat. 400 species watched him, expecting answers. He gave them the truth. For 3 hours, Vornak spoke. He showed the recordings. He played the testimonies of human soldiers who had never known peace. He displayed images of Earth, transformed into a fortress world. He explained what the Hollow were, what they wanted, what they would do if they reached the assembly. The crystal walls trembled with the shocked reactions of the delegates. Some cried out in fear. Some wept. Some simply sat in stunned silence, unable to process what they were hearing. When Vornak finished, the hall was quiet. The only sound was the soft singing of the crystal walls, unaware of the weight of what had been revealed. They asked nothing of us, Vornak said, his voice breaking. For 4,000 years, they protected us. They died by the billions. They gave up everything that makes life worth living, everything we take for granted, and they expected nothing in return. He pointed to the empty chair in the third ring, the simple seat that had been vacant for 3 millennia. That chair was empty because they were too busy saving us to sit in it. While we debated trade agreements and cultural exchanges, they were bleeding in the dark. While our children played in gardens, their children learned to kill. While we grew soft and peaceful, they grew hard and tired and forgot what peace even meant. Mirateth stepped forward. Her light flickered with emotion. What would you have us do, Ambassador? What we should have done 4,000 years ago, Vornak replied. Stand with them. The hall erupted. Voices shouted over each other. Some demanded immediate action. Others argued that the assembly had no weapons, no soldiers, no way to fight. Some accused Vornak of lying, of making up stories to cause panic. But Mirateth raised her hand, and silence fell. I have led this assembly for 500 years, she said. I have seen species rise and fall. I have watched civilizations grow from dust and return to dust. And in all that time, I have never been ashamed of who we are. She paused, her light dimming with sorrow. Until today. Today, I am ashamed. Ashamed that we lived in peace while others died for us. Ashamed that we never asked why the chair was empty. Ashamed that we called ourselves a community of worlds, while one world stood alone against the darkness. She spread her wings, and her light grew bright. No more. From this day forward, the Galactic Assembly will learn to fight. We will build weapons. We will train soldiers. We will do what we should have done from the beginning. We will stand with humanity. The delegates rose to their feet. Not all of them agreed. Not all of them were ready. But enough of them were. For the first time in 4,000 years, the galaxy was preparing for war. 3 months later, a human ship docked at Nexus Prime. Daniel Price walked through the Great Hall, surrounded by assembly guards who watched him with a mixture of awe and fear. He wore his worn uniform, still covered in the symbols of humanity's endless war. His eyes were tired. But something else flickered behind them. Curiosity. The Great Hall was different now. Among the elegant seats of the assembly races, weapons training displays had been installed. Shipyard designs hung from the crystal walls. Recruitment centers for the newly formed Galactic Defense Force stood at every entrance. Daniel stopped at the empty chair. The simple seat, made of dark material, unused for 3,000 years. He ran his hand along its arm, feeling the texture of a place humanity had never occupied. You really did it, he said softly. You actually decided to help. Vornak stood beside him. It is the least we could do, though I fear it may be too little, too late. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. Then he did something Vornak had never seen a human do. He smiled. You know what the hardest part of the last 4,000 years has been? Daniel asked. It was not the fighting. It was not the dying. It was the loneliness. knowing that we stood alone, knowing that if we fell, no one would even notice. He turned to face the assembly. 400 species had risen from their seats to watch him. 400 civilizations that had lived in ignorance of the war being fought on their behalf. We never expected anyone to come, Daniel continued. We never expected anyone to care. We had given up hope that we would ever be anything but alone. Mirateth descended from her platform and stood before him. Her light was warm and gentle. You are not alone anymore, she said. You never will be again. And for the first time in his life, Daniel Price felt something he had never experienced, something his parents had never felt, or his grandparents, or anyone in his family line for 160 generations. Hope. Outside the great windows of Nexus Prime, the first joint fleet of assembly and human ships passed by. They were heading to the front lines, to the darkness at the edge of the galaxy. The assembly ships were awkward, their crews untrained, their weapons barely functional, but they were there. They had come, and somewhere in the void, the Hollow felt something change. The warm light of the galaxy that they had hunted for so long was no longer defended by one small species. Now, the entire galaxy was rising to meet them. The war was not over. It might never be over. But for the first time in 4,000 years, humanity did not face the darkness alone, and that made all the difference.